My family abandoned me for years until I bought a custom estate. They showed up with a locksmith and a forged lease to take it from me. They had no idea what was waiting behind that heavy oak door. Blinding tactical flashlights hit their faces. Cold metal handcuffs clicked shut around their wrists. Their absolute panic was almost funny. They screamed my name in total fear, begging for mercy. My name is Valerie, and I am 32 years old. I run a successful cybersecurity and financial forensics firm in Atlanta. Before I continue this story about ultimate betrayal and sweet justice, please let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe if you have ever had to set a hard boundary with toxic relatives. The collision of my painful past and my triumphant present happened on a beautiful Tuesday evening. I was sitting at a private corner table inside a Michelin star restaurant in Buckhead. The ambiance was absolutely perfect. Soft jazz played through hidden speakers, and the scent of expensive truffle risotto filled the warm air. I was wearing a tailored designer suit, sipping a vintage red wine and celebrating a massive victory. My firm had just secured a highly lucrative corporate security contract with a Fortune 500 company. I was finally breathing easy. I had built my empire completely from scratch after my family wrote me off as a stubborn failure. I felt entirely at peace until the maitre d' approached my table looking incredibly uncomfortable. Before he could even speak, a loud voice shattered the elegant quiet of the dining room. "There she is." My mother Brenda marched past the host stand, waving her hands dismissively at the restaurant staff who tried to stop her. Trailing right behind her was my father Jerome, wearing his usual polished church suit. Next came my younger sister Alicia, clutching a designer handbag that I knew for a fact she could not afford. Bringing up the rear was her white husband Preston. He was a local real estate broker who always walked around with a smug smile like he owned the entire city. They did not have a reservation. They did not even have the basic decency to call my phone. They just crashed my private celebration with the subtlety of a runaway freight train. Diners at nearby tables turned their heads to stare at the sudden commotion. My mother thrives on public spectacle. She has always used the threat of public embarrassment to force me into immediate compliance. Brenda pulled out a heavy wooden chair and sat down uninvited. Jerome took the velvet seat next to her, crossing his thick arms. Alicia and Preston hovered behind them like arrogant backup dancers. I did not flinch. I slowly placed my crystal wine glass on the crisp white tablecloth and looked at them. "Hello, Mother," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. "To what do I owe this aggressive intrusion into my evening?" Brenda sighed dramatically, placing her palms flat on the table. "Valerie, we need to talk about urgent family matters." She projected her voice loudly enough for the neighboring wealthy patrons to hear. "We know you just closed on that massive property in Alpharetta, the $4.5 million manor." Preston chimed in, leaning forward with that familiar arrogant grin of his. "A beautiful piece of property, really. Way too big for just one single woman, though." I felt a familiar coldness settle deep in my chest. They had been tracking my real estate purchases through public records. I leaned back in my chair and stared right into his greedy eyes. "I bought it with my own money, Preston. Every single cent. What exactly is your point?" Brenda interrupted, waving a manicured hand in my face. "Preston has hit a bit of a rough patch with his real estate investments lately. The housing market has been cruel to him. Furthermore, Alicia is pregnant." Alicia immediately placed a hand over her perfectly flat stomach and gave me a practiced, pitiful look. "We are having a baby, Valerie. We need a stable environment. A safe place to raise your future niece or nephew properly." Jerome finally spoke up, using his booming pastor voice to command authority over the conversation. "Your sister and her husband are facing imminent eviction, Valerie. They are completely broke. You have more than enough space in that new empty mansion of yours. As a good Christian family, we must always share our abundant blessings." Brenda nodded vigorously in agreement. "Exactly. So you are going to hand over the keys to the Alpharetta house right now. You can just stay in your downtown penthouse apartment. Preston and Alicia will move into the manor so they can raise the baby comfortably. It is the only right thing to do for your own flesh and blood. I looked at the four of them, expecting me to simply surrender the biggest achievement of my life just because they demanded it. Years ago, their public pressure and guilt trips might have broken me down. I used to crave their approval so much that I would have given them anything. But I was no longer the scapegoat they could bully. I took a slow, deliberate breath and let a cold smile touch my lips. I reached into my designer purse and pulled out my black credit card to pay for my dinner. "You want my house?" I asked, my voice dripping with pure amusement. "You want me to hand over a multi-million-dollar estate to a man who gambled his career away and a sister who never worked a hard day in her life?" Brenda slammed her hand against the table, causing the silverware to rattle. "How dare you speak about your sister that way? We are your parents, and we are telling you what needs to happen. You owe this family absolutely everything." I just smiled at them coldly. I picked up my wine glass, letting the deep red liquid swirl for a moment before taking a slow, deliberate sip. The silence at our table was heavy with their expectation. They were sitting there fully believing I would cave and hand over the keys to my empire just to keep the peace and avoid a public scene. Instead, a soft laugh bubbled up from my throat. It started small but quickly grew into a genuine sound of pure disbelief. Brenda looked highly offended by my reaction. Her jaw tightened and she glared at me as if I were a misbehaving child. "You think this is funny, Valerie? We are talking about the survival of your family, and you are sitting there laughing in our faces." I set my glass down and leaned forward, resting my arms on the white tablecloth. "You think I owe this family everything, Mother. Let us take a little walk down memory lane and talk about what exactly I owe you." I shifted my gaze directly into my father's eyes, watching him shift uncomfortably in his velvet chair. "Do you remember my 18th birthday, Jerome? The day I received my acceptance letter to my dream university for computer science. I had worked tirelessly for 4 years to earn that spot. And what did you and Mother do with the college fund that was supposed to secure my educational future?" Jerome adjusted his tie, looking anywhere but at my face. "That was a long time ago, Valerie. We had to make difficult financial decisions for the good of the entire household. You cannot hold on to the past forever." "The good of the household," I repeated, my voice sharp enough to cut glass. "You drained my entire college savings account. You took every single penny I was promised so you could buy Preston a brand new Porsche Cayenne as a wedding gift. You bought a luxury sports car for a white man who had barely been in the family for 6 months, and you left your own daughter with absolutely nothing." I made sure they heard every word clearly without raising my voice. I reminded them how I had to take on grueling graveyard shifts working as a security monitor and scrubbing data servers until 3 in the morning just to pay my own tuition. I survived on cheap instant noodles and slept maybe 4 hours a night while Alicia and Preston drove around Atlanta in a luxury vehicle paid for by my stolen future. You threw me to the wolves and told me to figure it out on my own. Brenda leaned across the table, her eyes flashing with defensive anger. "Family over everything, Valerie. You need to understand how the real world works. Preston was marrying your sister. He was starting out as a real estate broker, and he needed to project a successful image to attract high-end clients. We made an investment in the family's future. You were always smart enough to figure things out on your own. We knew you would be fine without that money." I shook my head at her incredibly twisted logic. "So your grand investment in the family future is currently completely broke, facing eviction, and begging the daughter you abandoned for a place to live. That sounds like a terrible return on investment, Mother." Preston's face turned a deep, mottled shade of red. He slapped his hand lightly on the table, trying to regain control of the narrative. "Look, we did not come here to dig up the past. We are talking about right now. Alicia is carrying your niece or nephew. We need that house, Valerie. It is just sitting there empty while you stay in your penthouse. You can easily transfer the deed into a family trust. I can manage the property taxes and the upkeep for you. It makes perfect financial sense for everyone involved." I saw right through his pathetic strategy immediately. My background as a financial forensics expert means I can spot a scam a mile away. Preston was not just looking for a place to sleep. He was a desperate real estate broker, drowning in massive debt from his terrible crypto investments. He wanted my name on a deed transferred to a trust so he could use the property as collateral. He wanted to leverage my hard-earned equity to take out secret loans and save his own skin before his creditors came knocking at his door. I looked at Preston with absolute unmasked disgust. You really think I am stupid, Preston? You think I do not know exactly how your shady real estate mind works? You want the keys to my manor so you can secretly refinance it or use it to secure massive lines of credit to pay off your bad investments. You want to manipulate the asset because you think I am just an ignorant tech worker who does not understand property law or forensic accounting. Preston opened his mouth to deny the accusation, but I did not give him the chance to speak another lie. I bought that manor in Alpharetta for $4.5 million, and I bought it in cash, 100% upfront. I watched the blood drain completely from Preston's face. His smug expression vanished, replaced by a look of pure shock. There is no mortgage. I continued letting the reality of my wealth sink in for them. There are no bank strings attached. There is absolutely no financial leverage for you to manipulate or steal. The deed is locked down under my corporate holding company with layers of legal protection that a low-level broker like you could not even begin to decipher. You will never touch a single brick of that house. Alicia started to cry loud, dramatic tears meant to draw sympathy from the surrounding tables. She wiped her eyes carefully to avoid ruining her expensive makeup. "How can you be so cruel?" she sobbed, her voice trembling with fake emotion. "I am your sister. I am pregnant. We are going to be on the street and you are sitting here bragging about your money. You have a giant empty house and you are going to let your own family go homeless." I looked at her fake tears without a single ounce of pity. "You and your husband made your choices, Alicia. And now you get to live with the consequences of those choices. My home is not a rescue shelter for people who treated me like garbage." I took another sip of my wine, enjoying the taste and the look of total defeat on their faces. For years, they had conditioned me to believe that my value was tied only to what I could provide for them. They had built an entire family dynamic around sacrificing my needs to fund Alicia's lifestyle and Preston's fragile ego. Standing up to them was not just about protecting my property, it was about protecting the peace I had fought so hard to build over the last decade. Jerome tried to use his authoritative pastor voice again, attempting to shame me into submission. "Valerie, this is not how a woman of faith behaves. We raised you to have compassion. The Lord blesses those who help their family in times of desperate need. Refusing to help your pregnant sister is a sin against everything we stand for in our community." I set my glass down firmly. "Do not preach to me about sin, Jerome. Not when you sat back and watched my mother steal my education fund without a second thought. Compassion is earned, and you spent your entire quota a decade ago. You can take your fake righteous indignation and leave my table. I am finishing my dinner alone." Preston did not stay quiet for long. His initial shock faded into a twisted kind of arrogance. He adjusted the lapels of his expensive but outdated designer jacket. A smug grin crept back onto his face as he reached into his inner pocket. He pulled out a thick folded piece of paper and slapped it down onto the white tablecloth right next to my wineglass. He tapped his index finger against the crisp white page. "Take a good look at that, Valerie," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "It is a legally binding power of attorney. Your father signed it last week. It gives me full executive control over the family trust and all associated financial assets." I stared at the paper without making a move to touch it. I knew Jerome did not have a family trust worth anything, but Preston was building a narrative. He was a desperate real estate broker trying to bluff his way into my bank accounts. "You see, Valerie, we did a little digging into your past," Preston continued, leaning back in his chair like he had just won a chess match. "When you started that little cybersecurity firm of yours a decade ago, you lived under Jerome and Brenda's roof. You used their electricity. You used their internet. Jerome even gave you a few $100s to help you buy your first business laptop. That constitutes family business funds being used as seed money for your startup." I stared at him, letting the sheer absurdity of his claim wash over me. He honestly believed that a laptop loan from 10 years ago gave him a legal claim to my entire corporate empire. Because you used family resources to build your wealth, Preston said, narrowing his eyes. Your company is technically an extension of the family trust, which means your assets belong to the trust. I am going to file a lien against your new Alpharetta Manor first thing tomorrow morning. You will not be able to sell it or live in peace until you hand over the keys and settle your debt to this family. The audacity was almost impressive. A failing real estate broker was sitting across from a financial forensics expert trying to bluff his way into stealing a $4.5 million estate. He thought throwing around legal terms like power of attorney and property lien would intimidate me. He expected me to panic and beg for a compromise. He expected me to hand over my house to avoid a messy legal battle. Alicia saw my silence and mistook it for fear. She immediately jumped in to twist the knife. You always have to make things so difficult, Valerie, she said loudly, making sure the surrounding tables could hear her performance. We are offering you a chance to do the right thing for your family and your future niece or nephew. But you just want to sit there and be a selfish, angry black woman. You care more about your money and your massive empty house than you do about your own pregnant sister. I let the racial stereotype hang in the air. My own sister was using the angry black woman trope to shame me in the middle of a fine dining restaurant in Buckhead. She wanted me to raise my voice. She wanted me to slam my hands on the table and cause a scene so she could point her finger and play the ultimate victim. I refused to give her the satisfaction. I refused to let them turn my celebration dinner into a reality television spectacle. I slowly raised my hand and caught the attention of my waiter. He hurried over, looking extremely nervous about the tension radiating from our table. I will take the check, please, I said, my voice perfectly calm and polite. The waiter nodded and quickly produced the leather billfold. I did not even look at the total. I opened my purse and pulled out my heavy metal black card, placing it softly on the leather. Brenda stared at the prestigious credit card, her eyes widening slightly. Jerome shifted in his seat, his pastoral composure cracking under the weight of my silent confidence. The waiter returned a moment later and handed me the receipt. I picked up the pen and wrote down a $1,000 tip. I wanted the staff to know that my family's rude behavior did not reflect my own standards. I signed my name with slow, elegant strokes and stood up from the table. I looked down at the four of them, sitting around my table like scavengers waiting for scraps. Go ahead and file your fake lien, Preston, I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Go ahead and present your fraudulent documents to the county clerk. I strongly encourage you to try. Because the moment you submit forged paperwork across state or county lines, you are stepping into my world. And I promise you will not survive the audit. I picked up my designer bag and turned my back on them. I walked out of the dining room with my head held high, my heels clicking steadily against the polished hardwood floor. I did not look back to see their reactions. I walked through the grand lobby and stepped out into the warm Atlanta evening air. The valet immediately recognized me and jogged off to retrieve my car. I stood under the soft glow of the restaurant entrance lights, breathing in the fresh air and letting the tension slowly release from my shoulders. The valet pulled my sleek, dark luxury sedan up to the curb. I handed him a generous cash tip and slid into the driver's seat. As I started the engine, I glanced at the side mirror to check my blind spot. Through the reflection, I saw a figure emerge from the restaurant doors. It was Preston. He was standing near the edge of the valet zone, trying to look inconspicuous. He raised his smartphone and pointed it directly at the rear of my vehicle. He was snapping photos of my license plate. He thought he was being stealthy, but he was as obvious as a glowing beacon. He was gathering information, trying to track my registration details to locate the exact address of the Alpharetta Manor. I put the car in drive and pulled away from the curb smoothly. Let him take all the pictures he wanted. Let him search the county property records and file his fake liens. Preston was a desperate man playing a very dangerous game against an opponent he completely misunderstood. He thought he was dealing with an estranged sister who could be bullied into submission. He had no idea he had just declared war on a cybersecurity CEO who investigated financial crimes for a living. The battle lines were drawn, and I knew exactly how to dismantle his entire life. The morning sun was just beginning to illuminate the floor-to-ceiling windows of my downtown Atlanta penthouse. I stood in the kitchen holding a warm cup of black coffee and looking out over the city skyline. I felt completely rested after the disastrous dinner the night before. My phone rested on the marble countertop next to my hand. The screen suddenly lit up brightly, and a sharp notification tone broke the quiet silence of my apartment. It was not a regular text message or a standard social media alert. It was a Tier 1 security notification from my primary financial institution. I set my coffee mug down slowly and picked up the device. I unlocked the screen and read the automated message from my bank. The notification informed me that a formal legal request had been submitted to freeze my primary operational accounts and place a hold on my assets. A third party had presented documentation claiming a legitimate legal right to manage my financial portfolio. I did not feel any panic. Panic is a useless emotion reserved for people who do not have absolute control over their environment. I realized Preston had actually gone through with his pathetic threat. He had taken those blurry photos of my license plate outside the restaurant and used his federal real estate broker credentials to run my vehicle registration. He had tracked down my banking details and decided to launch a direct attack on my wealth. The sheer audacity of his move was almost impressive. He was treating my carefully built life like one of his desperate, distressed property foreclosures. He truly believed he could intimidate me by throwing fake legal weight around. I walked down the long hallway of my penthouse toward my home office. This was not a standard workspace with a simple laptop and a printer. This was a secure command center built for a chief executive officer of a cybersecurity firm. The room was equipped with 6 high-definition monitors, biometric security locks, and an encrypted server rack that connected directly to my company headquarters. I pressed my thumb against the biometric scanner panel. The heavy reinforced door unlocked with a quiet, satisfying click. I stepped inside the cool, dark room and sat down in my ergonomic leather chair. I woke up the system and watched the 6 screens illuminate the dark space with a sharp blue glow. I logged into my banking portal through a highly secure encrypted network tunnel. The fraudulent document Preston had submitted was sitting right there in the pending legal review folder of my bank account dashboard. It was a scanned digital copy of the power of attorney paperwork he had waved in my face at the Michelin star restaurant. I downloaded the file and routed it directly into my proprietary forensic analysis software. The software began stripping away the hidden digital layers of the file immediately. It took me exactly 30 minutes to completely dismantle his entire pathetic scheme. The metadata embedded deep inside the document told a hilarious story of absolute desperation. The file had not been drafted by a legitimate law firm or a licensed attorney. The digital creation timestamp showed the document was generated at 2 a.m, just hours after our intense confrontation in Buckhead. Preston had used a cheap basic online template and digitally manipulated my father Jerome's signature to make it look official. I did not stop at simply proving the document was a cheap forgery. I wanted to know exactly where Preston was operating from when he launched this attack. I ran a reverse trace on the Internet Protocol address that was used to submit the fraudulent request to my bank. The digital trace bounced through a commercial virtual private network, attempting to hide its origin. My software easily bypassed the cheap security measure and revealed the true origin point. The signal led straight back to the wireless internet network of Preston's failing boutique real estate office in Midtown Atlanta. He was sitting at his desk right now, thinking he had just outsmarted a financial forensics expert. I decided to take a much closer look at Preston's digital footprint while I was already inside his network. If he was desperate enough to commit federal wire fraud and forge legal documents, he had to be hiding a massive financial black hole. I accessed public financial registries and ran a cross-reference on his federal brokerage license number. I pulled his recent transaction history and analyzed his credit utilization reports. The picture that emerged on my monitors was absolute financial carnage. Preston had not just made a few bad real estate investments. He had completely destroyed his entire portfolio by heavily leveraging himself in highly volatile cryptocurrency markets. I found records of massive margin calls and entirely liquidated accounts. He was hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt to offshore crypto exchanges. His credit cards were completely maxed out and his business operating accounts were running on fumes. He needed millions of dollars immediately just to avoid total bankruptcy and potential criminal charges from his own furious investors. As I scrolled through his sinking financial records, a very strange pattern caught my attention. There were several large cash infusions that had temporarily saved his accounts from total liquidation over the past 3 months. We were talking about deposits of $50,000 and sometimes $80,000 at a time. These were not standard real estate commission payouts. The deposits were structured carefully to avoid triggering automated federal banking reporting thresholds, but the execution was incredibly amateurish. I highlighted the routing numbers associated with the incoming wire transfers. As a financial forensics investigator, I follow the money trail for a living. I ran the routing numbers through a secure corporate database to identify the originating institution. The results popped up on my center monitor and made me stop typing completely. The money was not coming from a private investor or a desperate family loan. The originating bank accounts belonged to the community outreach and building development funds of my father's megachurch. Jerome was the head of finance for his entire congregation. He had total unrestricted access to the charitable donations and operational budgets of the church. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the glowing screens in pure disbelief. My father, the righteous pastor who had just lectured me about sin and family values at a fancy restaurant, had been actively embezzling hundreds of thousands of dollars from his own loyal congregation. He was systematically draining the church outreach funds and secretly wiring the stolen money directly to Preston to cover his disastrous cryptocurrency debts. It all made perfect, sickening sense now. The church board of directors conducted an extensive financial audit every single year. I checked the church public calendar and saw that the annual audit was coming up in less than 2 months. Jerome and Preston were out of time and out of stolen church money. They needed a massive injection of cash to quietly replace the embezzled funds before the auditors discovered the missing hundreds of thousands of dollars. They needed my $4.5 million Alpharetta Manor. They planned to seize my property and use it as collateral for a massive commercial loan. They wanted to pay back the church before the audit happened, and then pocket the remaining cash to save Preston's failing real estate career. They were not just toxic family members asking for a generous handout. They were desperate criminals trying to cover up a massive embezzlement scheme by stealing my hard-earned wealth. I saved all the transaction logs and digital evidence to a secure encrypted external drive. They thought I was just an angry sister they could easily bully into submission. They had no idea they had just handed a loaded weapon to the exact person capable of destroying their entire lives. Sunday evening arrived with the stifling humidity typical of late summer in Atlanta. The grand sanctuary of my father's megachurch had been completely transformed for their annual fundraising gala. This was not just a simple church dinner. This was the social event of the season for the city's religious elite. Expensive luxury vehicles lined the massive parking lot and valet attendants rushed to open doors for wealthy donors wearing tailored tuxedos and glittering evening gowns. I pulled my dark sedan into the VIP parking section, a perk I knew the security guards would not question when they saw my confident demeanor. I stepped out of the car wearing a flawless, tailored emerald green suit that screamed wealth and absolute authority. My hair was pulled back into a sleek, severe bun. I carried a simple designer clutch containing a single encrypted flash drive, the weapon that would dismantle their entire facade. The heavy glass doors of the church lobby opened to reveal a scene of sickening hypocrisy. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden light over round tables draped in expensive silk linens. A string quartet played softly in the corner. Waiters in crisp white shirts carried silver trays of hors d'oeuvres through the crowd of smiling hypocrites. I stood near the entrance, just observing the performance playing out before my eyes. Right in the center of the grand hall stood Jerome holding a crystal glass of sparkling water and laughing loudly with a group of prominent local politicians. He looked every bit the devoted and trustworthy head of finance. Brenda was standing right next to him, wearing a diamond necklace that was undoubtedly purchased with embezzled community outreach funds. She was smiling and touching the arms of wealthy widows, playing the perfect supportive pastor's wife. A few feet away, Alicia and Preston were working the room like desperate politicians. Alicia was gently holding her completely fake baby bump while accepting congratulations from elderly church members. Preston was handing out his glossy real estate business cards to anyone who would make eye contact with him. He looked so proud and arrogant, completely unaware that I had spent the last 48 hours mapping every single fraudulent wire transfer he had ever received. They were all performing their assigned roles in this elaborate stage play. They thought they were untouchable, wrapped in the protective cloak of religious authority and fake suburban wealth. I felt a cold smile touch my lips. They had no idea that the architect of their destruction had just walked through the front doors. I did not stop to greet anyone. I did not accept the glasses of champagne offered by the passing waiters. I kept my eyes focused straight ahead and walked with a steady, measured pace along the outer edge of the grand hall. I knew the layout of this massive building better than anyone. I had spent my teenage years wandering these very halls, while my parents forced me to attend endless Sunday services. My target was not the main stage or the buffet line. My target was the audiovisual control room located on the second-floor balcony directly overlooking the entire congregation. That room controlled the massive digital screens flanking the main stage and the state-of-the-art sound system used to broadcast sermons to thousands of people. I was halfway down the quiet side corridor leading to the restricted access stairwell when I heard the sharp clicking of expensive heels rushing up behind me. Valerie, the loud, frantic whisper echoed off the marble walls of the empty hallway. I stopped walking, but I did not turn around immediately. I took a slow breath, letting the adrenaline settle deep into my veins before pivoting to face my mother. Brenda was marching toward me, her face flushed with a mixture of absolute panic and rising anger. Her fake socialite smile had completely vanished. She glanced nervously back over her shoulder toward the main hall to make sure none of the wealthy donors had followed her into the corridor. "What on earth are you doing here?" Brenda hissed, grabbing my forearm with her manicured fingers. Her grip was tight and desperate. "You were not invited to this gala. This is an exclusive event for high-level donors and church leadership. You need to leave right now before your father sees you." I looked down at her hand clutching my emerald green sleeve. I did not pull away. I just stared at her fingers until she felt the freezing intensity of my gaze and slowly released her grip. "I am here to make a donation, Mother," I said, keeping my voice perfectly calm and flat. "I thought Jerome would appreciate a substantial contribution to the Community Outreach Fund. You know, the same fund he has been quietly emptying for the past 6 months. Brenda's eyes widened in genuine terror for a fraction of a second before her defensive walls slammed back into place. "I do not know what crazy lies you are talking about," she stammered, her voice trembling slightly. "You are clearly having some kind of mental breakdown because you are so jealous of your sister. You need to turn around and walk out those doors, Valerie. Jerome is about to give the keynote speech to the entire congregation. The mayor is sitting at our table. You are not going to ruin this night for us. You are not going to embarrass this family in front of Atlanta's elite just because you are a bitter, lonely woman." I stepped closer to her, invading her personal space, until she was forced to take a step back against the cold marble wall. "I am not going to embarrass you, Brenda," I whispered, my tone dripping with absolute certainty. "You and Jerome managed to do that all by yourselves when you decided to steal hundreds of thousands of dollars from innocent people who trusted you. You embarrassed yourselves when you decided to use my house as a pawn in your pathetic little money laundering scheme." I reached into my clutch and pulled out the small silver encrypted flash drive. I held it up between us, letting the hallway lights catch its metallic surface. "This little drive holds every single wire transfer, Every forged document and every deleted bank record connecting your husband to Preston's failing crypto accounts, I said, watching the color completely drain from my mother's face. She opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. Her breathing became shallow and rapid. You thought you could bully me at a restaurant, and I would just roll over and hand you the keys to my empire. You forgot that I destroy financial criminals for a living. I slipped the drive back into my clutch and stepped around her trembling form. Do not do this, Valerie, Brenda gasped, grabbing at the empty air as I walked past her. Please, they will destroy us. They will take everything. I paused at the heavy wooden door of the stairwell and looked back at her pathetic, terrified face. You already took everything from me when I was 18, I reminded her coldly. Tonight I am just balancing the family ledger. I pushed open the heavy door and climbed the carpeted stairs to the second-floor balcony. The audiovisual control room was just ahead. The door was unlocked. The technician was probably down in the main hall eating free food. I stepped inside the dark room surrounded by glowing monitors and massive mixing boards. I locked the door behind me with a heavy metallic click and walked directly to the main presentation terminal. Through the soundproof glass of the control room, I could look down and see Jerome walking up the carpeted steps to the main stage. The congregation erupted into loud applause. He adjusted his microphone and smiled warmly at the sea of wealthy donors. I plugged my silver flash drive into the main terminal port. The system recognized the device immediately. I brought up the master presentation file that was queued for the giant LED screens flanking the stage. With a few quick keystrokes, I bypassed the church presentation software and mirrored my encrypted drive directly to the main display output. I loaded the first slide containing the heavily highlighted bank statements showing the stolen community outreach funds. My finger hovered over the execute button. Jerome raised his hands, asking the crowd for silence so he could begin his sermon about charity and sacrifice. I took a deep breath and smiled. My finger pressed down on the execute button just as Jerome leaned into the podium microphone. His deep, commanding voice echoed through the massive hall, talking about the virtues of family values and the sacred duty of charity. He was literally asking these wealthy donors to open their hearts and their wallets to help the less fortunate. It was a masterful performance of pure deception. I watched him through the soundproof glass, feeling absolutely no remorse for what I was about to do. The giant LED screens flanking the main stage flickered for a fraction of a second. The church logo vanished completely. In its place, a highly magnified, crystal-clear image of a confidential bank statement illuminated the grand sanctuary. The bright white background of the financial document cast a harsh glare over the front rows. Murmurs of confusion began to ripple through the sea of tuxedos and evening gowns. People squinted trying to read the massive numbers displayed above the stage. Jerome kept speaking for a few seconds, completely oblivious to the digital evidence looming right behind his head. I reached out and flipped the switch for the master public address microphone. The heavy professional-grade mic sat on the console in front of me. I leaned in close, letting my voice project through the state-of-the-art sound system that usually broadcasted my father's hypocritical sermons. "Good evening, everyone," I said, my voice cutting through the rising murmur of the crowd. My voice boomed across the sanctuary, echoing off the high vaulted ceilings. Jerome froze instantly. He recognized my voice immediately. He slowly turned around to look at the massive screens, and I watched the blood completely drain from his face. He gripped the edges of the wooden podium so hard his knuckles turned white. "My name is Valerie," I continued, keeping my tone completely analytical and detached. "I am the chief executive officer of a financial forensics firm here in Atlanta. I am also the daughter of your head of finance, Jerome. I apologize for interrupting this beautiful gala, but there is an urgent financial matter regarding your community outreach fund that requires the immediate attention of every donor in this room." Down in the crowd, I could see Preston frantically pushing his way toward the exit, but the tightly packed tables of wealthy parishioners blocked his escape path. Alicia was frozen in place, clutching her fake baby bump, while Brenda buried her face in her hands. "If you direct your attention to the screens, You will see the internal ledgers for the church charity accounts, I announced smoothly, pressing a button to highlight specific transactions in bright yellow. Over the past 6 months, exactly $300,000 has been systematically siphoned out of the community outreach program. These were funds designated for the homeless shelter, the youth education initiatives, and the local food bank. Instead of helping the community, these funds were authorized by Jerome for external wire transfers. Loud gasps erupted from the front rows where the church board of directors sat. The mayor of Atlanta, who was seated at the head table, set his napkin down and stared at the screens with a look of absolute fury. Jerome fumbled for his microphone, trying to speak over me. "This is a lie," he stammered, his booming pastor voice now sounding weak and terrified. "This is a malicious cyber attack by a troubled individual. Do not look at those screens." I did not let him control the narrative for even a second. I clicked to the next slide, which displayed Preston's offshore cryptocurrency exchange records right next to the church routing numbers. The financial link was undeniable. "The money was not stolen by anonymous hackers," I corrected him, my voice echoing with crushing authority. "The funds were wired directly into the failing cryptocurrency margin accounts of a local real estate broker named Preston, who also happens to be my brother-in-law. Preston lost every single penny of your charitable donations on terrible crypto investments. He is currently hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt." The sanctuary exploded into chaos. Wealthy donors were standing up from their tables, pointing at Jerome and shouting. Several elderly women in the front row looked like they were going to faint. The string quartet had stopped playing completely. I watched from the balcony as two board members marched directly toward the steps of the main stage, demanding answers from my father. But I was not finished yet. I needed them to understand exactly how deep this betrayal went. I clicked to the final slide showing the forged power of attorney document and the property records for my new estate. "They knew the annual church audit was scheduled for next month," I explained, talking over the shouting crowd. "They knew they were going to be caught and sent to federal prison for embezzlement, so they hatched a desperate plan. Last night, my family ambushed me at a restaurant and demanded the keys to my $4.5 million manor in Alpharetta. When I refused, Preston forged a legal power of attorney using his federal broker credentials. Their plan was to illegally seize my property, use it as collateral for a massive commercial loan, pay back the stolen church funds before the audit, and pocket the rest to save Preston from bankruptcy." The crowd turned their attention from the back of the room, where Preston was trying to hide behind a floral arrangement. A group of angry ushers and church elders quickly surrounded him, blocking any chance of escape. Alicia started wailing loudly, trying to use her fake pregnancy to gain sympathy, but the people around her stepped away in absolute disgust. I looked down at my father, who was still standing at the podium. He looked small, pathetic, and entirely defeated. His righteous facade had been completely shattered by digital forensics. There was no prayer or sermon that could save him from the raw data displayed on those massive LED screens. "All of the evidence you see on these screens has already been compiled into a secure encrypted file," I announced, delivering the final blow. That file was automatically forwarded to the Financial Crimes Division of the FBI and the Georgia Real Estate Commission exactly 5 minutes ago. I highly suggest the board of directors lock down all remaining church accounts immediately. Have a wonderful evening, everyone. I reached over and turned off the master microphone. The sound of my voice was instantly replaced by the deafening roar of the outraged congregation below. People were demanding their donations back. Board members were shouting for security to lock the doors so Jerome and Preston could not leave before the authorities arrived. The perfect, wealthy, devout family image was dead and buried under a mountain of undeniable digital receipts. I unplugged my silver flash drive from the terminal, dropped it back into my designer clutch, and smoothed the lapels of my emerald green suit. It was time to leave the control room and face the physical aftermath of my financial counterattack. I stepped out of the audiovisual control room, leaving the heavy soundproof door wide open behind me. The sheer volume of the chaos echoing up from the main sanctuary was deafening. I walked down the carpeted stairs with the slow, deliberate pace of someone who had just successfully executed a flawless operation. My emerald green suit remained perfectly crisp. My breathing was steady and calm. I reached the bottom of the stairwell and merged into the frantic crowd flooding the grand lobby. Wealthy donors were marching toward the coat check, demanding their luxury vehicles be brought around immediately. People were aggressively dialing their lawyers and bankers on their cell phones. The beautiful string quartet music had been entirely replaced by the ugly sounds of wealthy people realizing they had been conned out of their charitable donations. The sheer panic in the room was a testament to the power of undeniable digital evidence. I was just 10 feet away from the heavy glass exit doors when a sudden violent force spun me around. A sharp, stinging pain exploded across my left cheek. The sharp crack of skin striking skin echoed through the immediate vicinity, cutting through the ambient noise of the panicking crowd. Several people stopped and gasped, backing away to create a wide circle around us. Brenda stood directly in front of me. Her chest was heaving, and her eyes were wild with a feral kind of desperation. Her hand was still raised in the air, trembling from the force she had just used to strike my face. Her heavy diamond ring had caught the edge of my cheekbone, leaving a dull, throbbing ache that radiated down to my jaw. I did not flinch. I did not raise my hand to touch my face. I did not break eye contact. I simply stood there, letting the physical assault register without giving her the satisfaction of an emotional reaction. My absolute stillness seemed to unnerve her even more than my digital presentation had. "You ruined us!" Brenda screamed, her voice cracking as tears of pure rage streamed down her perfectly contoured face, ruining her expensive makeup. "You destroyed the family name Valerie. You destroyed everything we built in this community over the last 20 years. How could you do this to your own flesh and blood? We are going to be a laughingstock. My country club friends are already leaving out the back doors. Jerome is going to be arrested. You malicious, ungrateful child. You have stripped us of our dignity and our entire social standing." She was hyperventilating now, grasping at the silk fabric of her evening gown. Even in the face of undeniable proof that her husband had stolen hundreds of thousands of dollars from charity, her only concern was her social status and her reputation among the Atlanta elite. She was not crying for the homeless shelter or the youth programs that had been robbed. She was crying because she would never be invited to another high society gala. Her complete lack of moral awareness was staggering, but entirely predictable. I looked at her with a cold, clinical detachment. "I did not destroy your reputation, Mother," I said, my voice low and completely steady so only she could hear the absolute finality in my tone. "Jerome destroyed it when he decided to become a common thief. Preston destroyed it when he gambled away stolen charity money on worthless crypto markets to feed his massive ego. You destroyed it when you decided covering for criminals was more important than raising an honest family. I just provided the proper lighting so everyone else could see the ugly truth in the dark." Before Brenda could raise her hand for a second strike, a heavy, sweating mass of panic shoved its way through the crowd. It was Preston pulling a hysterical Alicia by the arm. Preston's expensive designer suit was completely soaked with nervous sweat. His tie was crooked and his usually smug face was pale and slick with terror. Alicia was sobbing uncontrollably, her hands clutching her fake pregnant belly, which had noticeably slipped a few inches to the left in the physical commotion, revealing the pathetic padding underneath her maternity dress. Preston grabbed Brenda's shoulder, pulling her back from me. "We have to go right now, Brenda," he hissed, his eyes darting frantically around the lobby, looking for the nearest exit that was not blocked by angry church elders. "The board members are calling the Atlanta Police Department. We need to get to the car before they lock down the parking lot and trap us inside." He started to drag his wife and my mother toward the side exit, but his massive ego would not let him retreat in silence. He could not resist stopping when he locked eyes with me. Even while actively fleeing a crime scene, his fragile, arrogant pride demanded the last word. He stepped closer to me, pointing a shaking, sweaty finger directly at my face. ignoring the fact that half the lobby was watching him. "You think you are so smart?" Preston growled, his breath smelling sour with panic and stale champagne. "You think you won because you put some bank statements on a screen and scared a bunch of old church ladies? You think your little computer tricks are going to stop me from getting what I am owed to fix this mess?" I simply tilted my head, observing his pathetic display of false bravado. "You are going to federal prison, Preston," I reminded him calmly. "You should be more worried about retaining a criminal defense attorney than making empty threats in a church lobby while your father-in-law takes the fall for your debts." Preston let out a harsh, desperate laugh that sounded entirely unhinged. "You do not know anything about how the real world works, Valerie," he sneered, wiping sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand. "I know real estate law inside and out. I know the legal loopholes that tech nerds like you never bother to read. You think locking down your precious Alpharetta Manor with digital security is going to keep us out? I am a licensed broker. We do not need your permission to take your house. We do not need your keys, and we do not need a mortgage transfer. I am going to take your $4.5 million estate right out from under you, and there is nothing your fancy cybersecurity firm can do to stop a perfectly executed legal maneuver. You are going to end up homeless on the street, and we are going to live in luxury while we sort this out. Mark my words." He yanked Alicia's arm roughly and dragged her toward the side doors, Brenda stumbling blindly behind them. I watched them flee into the humid Atlanta night like the desperate criminals they were. Preston's threat hung in the air, but it did not instill a single ounce of fear in my heart. His desperate promise to use real estate loopholes only confirmed exactly how delusional he had become. He was talking about squatter rights and adverse possession tactics, relying on slow-moving local civil courts to protect him if he could just physically breach my property boundary. It was the ultimate weapon of a failing, desperate scam artist trying to exploit a broken legal system. I turned back toward the main sanctuary for one final look at the empire they had built on lies. Through the wide-open double doors, I could see Jerome. He was no longer standing proudly at the podium, preaching about morality. He was backed into a corner, completely surrounded by the furious church board of directors and two aggressive security guards. His tailored suit looked rumpled, and he was holding his hands up in a pathetic gesture of surrender, trying to calm down men who were demanding to know where their money had gone. The powerful, respected pastor was gone. Only a cowardly thief remained, waiting for the police sirens that were already beginning to wail in the distance. I smoothed the front of my emerald green suit and turned my back on the wreckage of my former family. I walked out the main glass doors and stepped into the cool night air. The valet brought my dark sedan around, immediately sensing my need to depart the chaotic scene. I handed him a generous tip, slid into the quiet leather interior of my car, and drove away from the megachurch. My cheeks still stung with a dull, throbbing heat from my mother's physical assault. But the pain was completely eclipsed by the profound sense of liberation washing over me. They had promised to take my home and destroy my peace, but they were playing a local checkers game while I was already coordinating a federal chess match. The war was far from over, but I had just won a massive victory. The morning after the church gala, my Atlanta penthouse was completely silent, except for the low hum of my encrypted server racks. I sat in my ergonomic leather chair, sipping a fresh cup of dark roast coffee while reviewing the digital fallout from my presentation. Local news outlets were already picking up the story of the megachurch embezzlement scandal, and Jerome was officially under investigation. But my focus was not on my father or the ruined reputation of my mother. My focus was entirely on Preston and his desperate threat in the church lobby. He had promised to take my Alpharetta Manor using real estate loopholes, and I knew exactly which dirty playbook he was pulling from. Preston was planning to exploit the modern real estate nightmare known as squatters' rights. As a licensed broker, he knew that the local housing laws in Georgia heavily favored tenants over landlords when it came to immediate physical disputes. If someone could manage to get inside a property and present a seemingly valid lease to the local police department, the responding officers would refuse to remove them. The police would declare it a civil matter and force the rightful owner to go through a grueling eviction process in the county courts. That process could take anywhere from 6 months to a year, during which the squatters could live in the house, completely rent-free, while intentionally destroying the property out of pure spite. It was a vile tactic used by professional scam artists, and Preston was currently crafting the ultimate fraudulent document to pull it off. Through my network monitors, I tracked his digital footprint as he logged into a commercial real estate platform using his federal broker credentials. He was not just downloading a basic template this time. He was constructing a highly realistic, comprehensive residential lease agreement. He listed himself and Alicia as the primary tenants of my $4.5 million estate. He backdated the entire contract to make it look like they had been legally renting the property from me for the past 6 months. He even went as far as to fabricate fake digital payment receipts to make it appear as though he had been transferring monthly rent into a dummy account. The most critical part of his scheme was the signature. Preston used a sophisticated software manipulation tool to forge my digital signature at the bottom of the lease. He matched the cryptographic stamp using an old contract I had signed years ago when I helped my parents co-sign a minor auto loan. On paper, the lease looked absolutely flawless. To a standard patrol officer answering a trespassing call, that document would look like a legitimate binding contract, giving Preston and Alicia the absolute right to occupy my home. He thought he was being an undetectable mastermind, weaving a web of legal protection that would force me to surrender my sanctuary. But he was incredibly naive about the level of surveillance I maintained over my physical and digital assets. My Alpharetta Manor was not just a beautiful house with expensive Italian marble and vaulted ceilings. It was a fortress equipped with military-grade, smart home security algorithms designed by my own cybersecurity firm. The perimeter was armed with sensors that most private security companies did not even know existed on the commercial market. 2 days after the church incident, I was reviewing some code on my center monitor when a sharp red alert flashed across my peripheral screen. The artificial intelligence system governing my empty estate had detected a suspicious pattern of physical activity. The Perimeter Defense Program flagged multiple unauthorized vehicles loitering near the front gates of the property. I set my coffee down and maximized the security feed. My property was surrounded by high-definition, ultra-wide cameras hidden seamlessly within the landscaping and the architectural features of the manor. I pulled up the recorded timeline and watched the footage from the past 48 hours. A dark gray pickup truck had driven slowly past my driveway 6 different times. It never stopped fully, but it slowed down just enough for the occupants to study the perimeter fencing and the sightlines of the front door. The artificial intelligence system had automatically logged the license plate and cross-referenced it with local databases, finding no match to any known delivery services or neighborhood residents. It was a clear surveillance pattern utilized by individuals preparing for an unauthorized entry. I engaged the live feed from the primary doorbell camera, which was equipped with a highly advanced facial recognition software suite. The dark gray truck pulled up to the curb once again. This time, the passenger side door opened. Preston stepped out onto the pristine sidewalk. He was wearing a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes and a pair of dark sunglasses attempting to hide his identity from casual observers. He walked casually up the driveway, pretending to be on a phone call, while his eyes darted nervously across the front facade of my house, taking mental notes of the entry points. He was scouting the property, looking for vulnerabilities, blind spots, and easy points of entry to exploit. My facial recognition software locked onto his jawline, and the visible portions of his face, instantly matching his biometric profile with a 99% accuracy rating. A green confirmation box appeared over his head on my monitor, tagging him as a known hostile entity. He was not alone on this scouting mission. The driver of the truck stepped out a moment later. He was a heavy-set man, wearing dirty work clothes and carrying a heavy canvas tool bag. I ran his face through the system, and the database returned a rapid match for a man with a lengthy criminal record for breaking and entering. He was currently operating as a shady, unlicensed locksmith who catered to clients needing quiet off the books entry into contested properties. Preston was bringing in professional muscle to bypass my physical locks because he knew his fake paperwork would only work if he was already standing inside the living room. I watched through the crisp 4K video feed as Preston pointed toward the heavy oak front door and then gestured toward the side entrance near the garage. The locksmith nodded, pulling a specialized drill and a set of tension picks from his canvas bag to demonstrate his bypass method. They were mapping out their exact angle of attack. They planned to drill the deadbolts, replace the lock cylinders, and walk right into my foyer, holding their fabricated 6-month lease. They genuinely believed they were about to execute the perfect real estate heist and bend the local police to their will. I zoomed in on Preston's face, noting the eager, desperate sweat glistening on his forehead. He was banking his entire future on this squatter scheme, thinking he could hold my home hostage and force me to pay off his massive cryptocurrency debts to get it back. He thought my lack of physical presence at the manor meant the house was vulnerable and unprotected. He had no idea that every single step he took on my driveway was being recorded, analyzed, and compiled into a massive federal evidence file. I leaned back in my chair, watching the two men retreat to their truck to finalize their break-in strategy. They were preparing to breach my sanctuary, but they were blindly walking straight into a high-tech digital bear trap. I watched the dark gray truck pull away from my driveway on the security feed, knowing their physical breach was only one half of Preston's master plan. The other half was social manipulation, and that attack came exactly 2 hours later. My secondary monitor lit up with a barrage of automated social media alerts. My algorithms were programmed to flag any public mentions of my name, my company, or my properties across all major digital platforms. The alerts were pouring in at an alarming rate, primarily originating from TikTok and Instagram. I opened the flagged link and leaned back in my leather chair. Alicia had finally played her role in this pathetic theatrical production. Her face filled the center screen. The video was heavily filtered with a soft lighting effect designed to make her look incredibly fragile and exhausted. She was sitting in what looked like the cramped back seat of a cheap rental car, cradling her fake pregnant belly with both hands. Her makeup was intentionally smudged around the edges of her eyes to simulate hours of crying. She took a deep, shaky breath before speaking directly into the camera lens. "Please help us," Alicia sobbed, her voice trembling with perfectly rehearsed despair. "I never thought I would have to air my family trauma on the internet, but my husband and I are desperate. My wealthy sister Valerie just illegally locked us out of the home we have been renting from her for the past 6 months. We paid her all of our savings for rent in advance, and now she changed the smart locks without any warning. I am 6 months pregnant and sleeping in a car because my cruel rich sister decided she wants to sell the house and throw her own family out on the street. It was a masterpiece of digital manipulation. She did not mention the megachurch embezzlement scandal. She did not mention Preston's massive cryptocurrency debt or his failing real estate career. She just painted herself as the ultimate victim of corporate greed and familial betrayal. She held up a printed copy of the forged lease agreement, waving it at the camera as if it were a shield of absolute truth. The video ended with her burying her face in her hands, weeping loudly while Preston wrapped a comforting arm around her shoulders from the front seat. I watched the engagement metrics skyrocket in real time. The algorithm favored high-emotion drama, and Alicia's tearful performance was perfectly engineered to go viral. Within 45 minutes, the video had crossed 100,000 views. The comment section was an absolute bloodbath of misplaced public outrage. Thousands of strangers from the local Atlanta community were tagging my cybersecurity firm, demanding justice for a pregnant woman who was supposedly sleeping in a parking lot. Local influencers were duet framing the video, calling me a heartless corporate monster and a disgrace to the Black community. People were sharing the video to local news stations, tagging investigative reporters, and demanding an inquiry into my business practices. They were trying to build a bulletproof public narrative before executing their physical break-in. They wanted the entire city of Atlanta to believe they were the rightful tenants. So when the inevitable police confrontation happened, the court of public opinion would already be firmly on their side. It was an insidious strategy designed to pressure me into surrendering the Alpharetta Manor just to stop the public relations nightmare. My personal cell phone began vibrating rapidly on the desk. The caller ID showed the name of my lead corporate attorney, Jonathan. I answered the call, putting him on speakerphone while I continued to monitor the rising tide of internet outrage. Valerie, have you seen the social media posts? Jonathan asked, his voice tight with professional concern. The legal team is already drafting a cease and desist order for defamation, but we have a much bigger problem on our hands right now. I am watching the metrics climb as we speak, Jonathan, I replied, my voice remaining perfectly calm. They are laying the groundwork for a squatter takeover. Preston was scouting the physical perimeter of the property earlier today with an unlicensed locksmith. They are planning to breach the house tonight. Jonathan let out a heavy sigh over the speakerphone. Valerie, you need to understand exactly how dangerous the situation is about to become. If Preston and Alicia manage to drill those locks and step foot inside your foyer, the entire legal landscape changes instantly. If they get their bags inside and set up camp, they will call the local Atlanta Police Department themselves. When the patrol officers arrive, Preston will hand them that forged, backdated lease agreement. I know how the loophole works, I said, opening a blank terminal window on my screen. The local cops will look at the lease and refuse to make an arrest. Exactly! Jonathan confirmed, his tone growing increasingly urgent. The responding officers are not forensic document experts. They will not be able to verify that the digital signature is forged on the spot. They will look at a pregnant woman crying in the living room and a husband holding a seemingly valid legal contract. The police will declare it a civil dispute over tenant rights. They will put their hands up, tell you to hire an eviction lawyer, and they will drive away, leaving your family sitting comfortably inside your $4.5 million home. Jonathan paused to let the severity of the situation sink in before delivering the hardest truth. If they establish residency tonight, you could be locked out of your own property for a full year. The Fulton County eviction courts are massively backlogged. Preston knows how to file endless delay motions and frivolous appeals to drag the process out for months. During that time, they will live rent-free. They will trash your custom Italian marble. They will sell your appliances and completely destroy the value of the estate out of pure spite while playing the victims on social media. You cannot let them get inside that house, Valerie. We need to send private security to block the driveway right now. I leaned forward and rested my elbows on the smooth surface of my desk. I watched Alicia's fake crying face loop endlessly on the social media feed. My family was banking everything on the assumption that I would fight this battle in the slow, incompetent local civil courts. They thought they had outsmarted the system by weaponizing tenant laws and public sympathy. Do not send private security, Jonathan, I instructed, my voice dropping to a cold, calculating register. I want them to drill those locks. I want them to step inside my foyer holding their forged documents. Valerie, that is a massive mistake. Jonathan warned, his legal instincts fighting against my unorthodox strategy. If you let them in, the local police will not drag them out. I am not calling the local police. Jonathan, I replied, shutting down the social media monitor completely. Preston used his federal broker credentials to transmit a forged real estate document across interstate servers. He is attempting to commit a felony wire fraud scheme against a corporate entity. This is no longer a local civil dispute over a broken family dynamic. This is a federal crime. Let them have their viral internet moments and their fake tears. I am going to let them walk right into a federal trap, and I am going to lock the door behind them. I ended the call with Jonathan, leaving him to process the magnitude of my strategy. The local police were exactly what Preston wanted. But I was about to give him the one thing a desperate scam artist fears most: federal jurisdiction. I turned back to my glowing monitors and brought up the digital footprint of the forged lease agreement Preston had created. As a licensed real estate broker, he had access to a proprietary federal portal to generate official residential contracts. The servers hosting that specific portal were physically located in California and New York. By logging into that system from Georgia, fabricating a residential lease, and attaching my digitally forged signature to a document meant to illegally secure a multi-million-dollar asset, Preston had crossed a massive legal line. He had transmitted fraudulent financial data across state lines. That was the textbook definition of federal wire fraud, combined with aggravated identity theft. I picked up my encrypted cellular device and bypassed my standard contact list. I typed in a secure direct line that I had not used in over 2 years. The phone rang twice before a deep, gravelly voice answered. It was Special Agent Marcus Hayes from the White Collar Crime Division of the FBI field office in Atlanta. Marcus and I had collaborated on several massive corporate embezzlement cases in the past, providing his team with forensic data that led to dozens of federal convictions. He knew my reputation for absolute accuracy. "Valerie," he said, his tone shifting into immediate professional focus. "It has been a while to what do I owe the pleasure of a direct call?" "Marcus, I have a slam-dunk wire fraud and identity theft case for you," I replied smoothly, tapping my manicured nails against my desk. A licensed real estate broker is currently using forged federal documents generated across state lines to execute a hostile takeover of a $4.5 million property. He is planning to physically breach the estate tonight, using an unlicensed locksmith and claim squatter rights, using the fake lease. Marcus let out a low whistle over the phone. "Squatters' rights. That usually falls under local civil disputes, Valerie. Local cops hate dealing with that mess." "I know," I said, letting a hard smile form on my face. "But the local cops do not know about the forged digital signatures crossing interstate servers, and they certainly do not know that the suspect is heavily tied to a pending megachurch embezzlement investigation involving hundreds of thousands of missing charity dollars. I am sending you the complete digital packet right now. Routing numbers, IP addresses, server logs, and the forged lease. I have live 4K camera feeds covering every inch of the target property. I want your tactical team waiting in the dark when he drills the lock." I heard the rapid clicking of a keyboard on Marcus' end of the line as he received my encrypted file. Within 60 seconds, his breathing changed. "Valerie, this data is bulletproof. He used his federal broker credentials to generate the fraud. I am getting a federal magistrate to sign an arrest warrant right now. We will have a SWAT team on standby." Before I disconnected with Marcus, I made one more necessary phone call. I contacted the chief investigator at the Georgia Real Estate Commission. I forwarded them the same digital packet flagging Preston's broker license for immediate permanent revocation, pending a federal sting operation tonight. His entire professional life was completely dismantled before the sun even set. But for the trap to spring perfectly, my family needed to believe that the Alpharetta Manor was completely vulnerable and unguarded. They were undoubtedly watching my every move, monitoring my social media, and tracking my daily routines to find the optimal window for their break-in. I needed to give them a golden opportunity they could not possibly resist. I stood up from my command center and walked into my master bedroom. I pulled a sleek designer suitcase from my closet and quickly packed a few high-end business outfits. I called a private black car service and instructed the driver to take me directly to the international terminal at Hartsfield-Jackson Airport. My family thought I was just an arrogant tech CEO who flaunted her wealth. I decided to play exactly into their preconceived notions. When I arrived at the bustling airport, I walked slowly through the main concourse, making absolutely sure my face was captured by public security cameras and any potential private investigators Preston might have hired to tail me. I checked into the exclusive first-class Delta Sky Club lounge. I found a quiet table near the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the tarmac. I ordered a glass of expensive champagne and placed my passport right next to a printed first-class boarding pass to London. I arranged the lighting perfectly and snapped a crisp photograph of the setup. I uploaded the picture to my Instagram and LinkedIn accounts with a highly visible caption, "Off to the United Kingdom, for a week-long cybersecurity summit, looking forward to disconnecting and enjoying some peace across the pond. I set my phone down and watched the analytics dashboard on my secondary screen. Within 4 minutes, I saw 2 anonymous burner accounts view my story. My algorithms immediately traced the IP addresses of those burner accounts straight back to Alicia's phone. They had swallowed the bait whole. They believed I was boarding an international flight, leaving my multi-million-dollar estate completely empty and thousands of miles out of my physical reach for an entire week. As soon as the boarding calls for the London flight began echoing through the lounge, I stood up and grabbed my designer bag. I did not walk toward the departure gate. Instead, I exited the Sky Club and navigated through a restricted VIP corridor that led directly to the lower-level arrivals curb. A heavily tinted armored SUV, sent by my own security firm, was already idling quietly by the concrete pillar. I opened the heavy door and slid into the spacious back seat, pulling the curtains shut to block any outside view. The driver did not say a word as he merged smoothly onto the interstate. We were not going back to my downtown penthouse. The SUV drove me straight to my company's underground secure command bunker, located on the outskirts of the city. I stepped out of the vehicle and walked into a massive room lined with dozens of illuminated screens and dedicated server stacks. I sat down at the primary observation terminal and linked my estate's high-tech security feeds directly to Marcus Hayes at the FBI field office. The digital tripwires were set. The federal agents were briefed and waiting in the shadows. My family thought they were about to execute the perfect real estate heist while I was trapped on a plane over the Atlantic Ocean. They had absolutely no idea that I was sitting in a dark room just a few miles away, watching their every move with a cup of hot coffee and a direct line to a federal SWAT team. All I had to do now was wait for the rats to creep out of the darkness and step onto my property. The digital clock on my primary monitoring screen flipped to exactly 2 in the morning. The command bunker was completely silent, except for the low, steady hum of the server cooling fans. I took a slow sip of my black coffee, letting the bitter warmth ground me. On the massive wall of monitors, the Alpharetta Manor sat completely dark and still. The perimeter cameras were operating in crisp 4K night vision, casting a pristine grayscale image across my screens. Every blade of grass, every shadow cast by the towering oak trees, was rendered in absolute perfect clarity. I had disabled the exterior floodlights remotely to give them a false sense of security. They needed to believe the estate was entirely dormant. The motion sensors at the base of the main driveway pinged a silent alert to my terminal. A set of heavy headlights swept across the wrought iron security gates. I watched as a massive rented U-Haul moving truck idled at the entrance. Preston had clearly used his real estate access codes to bypass the neighborhood community gate, but my personal property gate was a different story. He stepped out of the passenger side of the truck holding a heavy pair of bolt cutters. He looked around nervously before snapping the standard padlock I had deliberately left on the manual override box. He pushed the heavy iron gates open with a triumphant smirk. The truck rolled slowly up the winding driveway, its tires crunching softly against the gravel. The truck parked right in front of the grand portico. The doors opened and the intruders finally stepped out into the humid Georgia night. Preston was the first to emerge, rubbing his hands together in greedy anticipation. Alicia climbed down from the cab, moving surprisingly fast for a woman who was supposedly 6 months pregnant and sleeping in a parking lot. She was not even bothering to hold her fake belly anymore. The back doors of the truck swung open, revealing my mother Brenda and my father Jerome. They had actually ridden in the back of a moving van just to participate in the hostile takeover of my home. Another vehicle, a beat-up dark sedan, pulled up behind the moving truck. The same unlicensed locksmith I had identified days ago stepped out carrying his heavy canvas tool bag. Preston waved him over to the massive custom oak front doors. The locksmith did not waste any time. He pulled a heavy-duty cordless drill from his bag and pressed it directly against the reinforced deadbolt of my front door. The high-pitched whining sound of the drill biting into the metal echoed through my hidden microphones and played perfectly through the studio monitors in my command center. The microphones hidden within the porch light fixtures were military-grade. I could hear every single breath, every rustle of clothing, and every arrogant whisper shared among my family members. They were gathered on my front steps, huddled together like giddy children opening stolen presents. I cannot believe this is actually working, Alicia whispered excitedly, grabbing Preston's arm. She is probably fast asleep in some luxury hotel in London right now, having no idea we are walking right into her precious mansion. Preston let out a low, arrogant chuckle. I told you all this would be a piece of cake, he bragged, leaning against the stone pillar. Valerie might be some big-shot corporate executive, but at the end of the day, she is just an arrogant tech nerd who does not understand how real estate actually works in the real world. The local cops will take one look at my forged lease and tell her to kick rocks. We own this place now. Jerome stood on the manicured lawn, looking up at the towering facade of the estate. His pastor persona was completely gone, replaced by raw, unfiltered greed. Look at the size of that detached garage, he said, his voice filled with awe. I can finally bring my vintage classic cars out of storage. The climate control in a place like this must be phenomenal. I am going to claim the entire left wing for my private study. Brenda nodded eagerly, running her hands over the expensive brickwork. And I am going to host the next country club luncheon right here in the grand dining room, she added, her voice dripping with spiteful satisfaction. Valerie thought she could lock us out and embarrass us, but we are going to live like royalty while she begs a judge to let her back inside. I sat in the dark bunker listening to their pathetic delusions of grandeur. They were dividing up my property, plotting how to exploit my hard work, and celebrating my supposed defeat. They truly believed their cheap physical break-in could outsmart a meticulously crafted digital trap. The locksmith pulled his drill back, and the heavy metal cylinder of the lock fell out onto the porch with a dull thud. He inserted a new cheap lock core and turned a fresh key. The heavy oak door groaned slightly as it unlatched. Preston handed the locksmith a thick wad of cash. The man nodded, packed his tools, and drove away into the night, leaving my family alone on the threshold of my home. Preston turned the brass handle and pushed the door wide open, revealing the pitch-black grand foyer of the manor. Welcome home, family, Preston whispered, gesturing for Jerome and Brenda to step inside first. Alicia practically skipped through the doorway entirely, forgetting to act like a suffering pregnant victim. I watched their silhouettes disappear into the dark entryway of the house. My fingers hovered over the master control keyboard. They had officially crossed the threshold. The crime of breaking and entering was now fully complete. They had brought the forged documents across state lines, intended to commit wire fraud, and physically breached a private estate. The federal agents were already positioned in the shadows of the surrounding woods, waiting for my signal. I took one last sip of my coffee, letting the sweet taste of absolute victory settle over me. It was time to let them explore the dark house for just a few minutes before I brought their entire world crashing down. The heavy oak door swung shut behind them, sealing them inside the grand foyer of my Alpharetta Manor. The heavy metallic click of the new lock echoed in the massive empty space. They were standing in complete darkness, but I could see every single expression on their faces through the infrared lenses of my hidden security cameras. Preston pulled out his smartphone and turned on the flashlight, sweeping the harsh white beam across the imported Italian marble floors and the sweeping double staircase that led to the second floor. Wow! Preston breathed out, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. He swept the light over the crystal chandelier hanging dormant above their heads. I told you this place was a gold mine. He turned to Jerome and Brenda with a sickeningly proud grin on his face. By tomorrow morning, I will have all the utilities switched over to my name, he boasted loudly, pointing his phone flashlight toward the vaulted ceiling. I have the forged lease agreement, saved as a PDF on my phone, and ready to be emailed to the water and power companies the minute their offices open at 8. Once those bills are in my name, the local police will look at the paperwork and tell Valerie she has to take us to eviction court. It is absolutely foolproof. They cannot touch us once the lights are on and the water is running under my account. I sat in my secure command bunker, listening to the pristine audio feed, playing through my studio monitors. Preston was literally outlining his exact plan to commit further wire and mail fraud to switch utility accounts using a fabricated legal document. He was speaking clearly and loudly, completely unaware that his voice was being recorded onto a secure federal server. It was the most beautiful confession I had ever heard. He was handing the FBI a perfectly narrated roadmap of his entire criminal enterprise. Alicia did not even wait for Preston to finish his arrogant speech. She tossed her designer handbag onto an antique console table and practically sprinted up the grand curving staircase. Her fake pregnant belly shifted awkwardly against her dress, but she did not care anymore. There were no church donors or social media followers around to perform for. She was moving with the speed and agility of a completely healthy, non-pregnant woman driven purely by unfiltered greed. Her heavy footsteps echoed down the second-floor hallway as she hurried to claim the best room in the house. I switched my primary monitor to the master suite camera feed. Alicia burst through the double doors of my private bedroom, sweeping her phone flashlight over my custom king-sized bed and the plush velvet seating area. She let out a loud squeal of delight and immediately headed straight for my massive walk-in closet. I watched in crisp 4K night vision as she threw open the closet doors and began running her hands over my expensive tailored suits, my silk blouses, and my racks of designer shoes. "Oh my God, Preston, you have to see this!" Alicia yelled down the stairs, her voice echoing through the quiet house. "She has thousands of dollars worth of designer shoes and bags just sitting here." She pulled one of my expensive emerald silk dresses off the rack and held it up to her body, spinning around in the dark closet. "I am going to list all of this online first thing tomorrow?" She laughed maliciously. "She will not be able to get back inside for at least a year. By the time a judge finally signs an eviction notice, I will have sold her entire wardrobe and we will have enough cash to furnish the nursery and buy a new car. She is so stupid for leaving all this behind. I am taking the master suite and there is nothing she can do about it." Every word she spoke was a documented admission of intent to commit grand theft and burglary. She was standing inside a home she broke into, openly plotting to fence my personal property for profit. My digital evidence file was growing thicker and more devastating by the second. The microphone picked up the sound of her ripping clothing tags and tossing my expensive shoes into a pile she intended to claim for herself. Downstairs, Brenda and Jerome were conducting their own greedy tour of the main floor. They walked past the formal dining room and stepped into my custom-built chef kitchen. I switched another monitor to the kitchen feed. Brenda was trailing her fingers across the smooth surface of the massive waterfall edge quartz island. She scoffed softly, shaking her head in the dark as her phone flashlight illuminated the state-of-the-art appliances. "It is so cold and sterile in here," Brenda complained to Jerome, her voice dripping with unearned superiority. "Look at this minimalist garbage. There is absolutely no soul in this house." Valerie always had terrible taste. She has all this money and she decorates her home like a corporate hospital lobby. I am going to have to bring in some real warmth, some heavy drapes and proper traditional furniture. We will need to redecorate the entire main floor before I invite anyone over. Jerome nodded, walking over to the industrial-sized stainless steel refrigerator and peering at his reflection in the dark metal. "The layout is good, though," he murmured, his mind clearly racing with the possibilities of his stolen prize. "We can host the church elders here next month. Once we get that loan using the house as collateral, I can easily replace the outreach funds before the audit. The board of directors will be so impressed by this estate, they will probably nominate me for a higher regional position in the ministry. We just need to get through the next few weeks, and everything will be perfectly fine. No one will ever know the money was missing." Brenda smiled, wrapping her arms around Jerome. "You see, I told you God would provide a way out for us," she whispered, leaning her head against his shoulder. "Valerie was just the vessel meant to deliver this blessing to our family. She never deserved a place like this anyway. She is too bitter and isolated to appreciate a family home. It belongs to us now. We earned this after dealing with her difficult attitude for all these years." The absolute delusion radiating from my screens was staggering. They were standing in the pitch-black kitchen of a house they had just illegally broken into, using an unlicensed locksmith and forged federal documents to cover up a massive church embezzlement scandal. Yet my mother still had the sheer audacity to frame their criminal actions as a divine blessing. She truly believed that the universe had orchestrated this entire scenario to reward them for their terrible behavior. They were justifying their theft by convincing themselves that my lack of a traditional husband and children somehow made my hard-earned wealth illegitimate. I leaned back in my ergonomic leather chair inside the secure bunker, taking a slow, steady breath. My hands rested lightly on the control deck. The evidence collection phase of my operation was officially complete. They had verbally admitted to the forgery, they had confessed to the church embezzlement, they had detailed their plans to steal and sell my personal belongings, and they had confirmed their intent to illegally occupy my property to extort me. I glanced at the secure communication line connecting me directly to Special Agent Marcus Hayes and the federal SWAT team waiting silently in the dense tree line surrounding the manor. They had been listening to the same raw audio feed that I was monitoring. The trap was fully loaded, and the prey had marched willingly into the very center of the cage. They were wandering through the dark rooms of my house, completely intoxicated by their own arrogant delusions of victory. They thought they were the apex predators who had finally conquered the rebellious black sheep of the family. They were entirely oblivious to the fact that their reign of terror was about to end in a blinding flash of tactical lights and federal charges. It was time to turn the lights on. Preston walked out of the dark kitchen and headed back toward the grand foyer, his phone flashlight cutting a narrow, pale beam across the imported marble floor. I watched him navigate toward the utility hallway, located just behind the sweeping double staircase. He was looking for the main electrical panel. He wanted to flip the master breaker and flood the entire $4.5 million estate with light to truly admire his stolen prize. He muttered loudly, telling Jerome and Brenda to come out of the kitchen and watch the grand reveal. Alicia was still upstairs rummaging through my designer closet, completely ignorant of the trap closing around them. Preston opened the gray metal door of the utility box and reached his sweaty hand inside toward the main switch. Sitting in my secure command bunker, miles away, I leaned forward and placed my finger on the master execution key of my security console. I did not just turn off the lights. I engaged the absolute lockdown protocol designed specifically to isolate and trap hostile intruders. I pressed the key down with a heavy, satisfying press. Inside the Alpharetta Manor, the smart home system reacted instantly. The ambient glow of the digital thermostats and the standby lights on the kitchen appliances vanished in a fraction of a second. Total suffocating darkness swallowed the entire house. Then came the sound. A loud mechanical slamming noise echoed through the grand foyer, followed by a rapid succession of heavy metallic clanks. Thick steel deadbolts automatically shot out from the heavy oak front doors, sealing them shut. The reinforced security shutters on the ground floor windows slammed downward, locking into their tracks with a terrifying finality. Preston dropped his phone in the utility hallway. The flashlight screen shattered against the marble, leaving them in absolute pitch blackness. What was that loud noise? Brenda shrieked from the kitchen doorway, her voice trembling with sudden panic. Jerome bumped into a solid wall, trying to find his way back to the foyer in the dark. The power just completely cut out, Jerome said. His pastoral confidence entirely replaced by pure, unadulterated fear. Preston fumbled around on the floor, grabbing his cracked phone. He rushed over to the front door and grabbed the brass handle, pulling frantically. "It is locked," he yelled, his voice rising in pitch. "The deadbolts are jammed inside the doorframe and I cannot get it open." Up on the second floor, Alicia started screaming. "Preston, the bedroom door just slammed shut and it will not open. I am locked inside the closet." She was pounding her fists against the heavy mahogany wood of the master suite, completely trapped like a rat in a velvet cage. They were officially trapped. They had planned to call the local police in the morning, holding their fake lease and playing the victims. They thought they would have hours to settle in and claim residency in my home. They never anticipated that the house itself would turn into a federal holding cell. Brenda started sobbing hysterically, telling Jerome to break a window. Preston was hyperventilating, kicking the heavy oak door with his expensive leather shoes, but the reinforced steel core did not even budge. They were running out of oxygen in their own minds, completely consumed by the claustrophobic terror of being locked in the dark. Through my high-definition infrared cameras, I watched them scramble in the pitch-black foyer like desperate animals. Then the atmosphere in the room shifted entirely. The silence of the dark estate was shattered by the sound of heavy tactical boots hitting the front porch. Before Preston could even register the noise outside, a series of brilliant red laser sights pierced through the narrow glass panels surrounding the front door. The bright red beams cut through the darkness of the foyer, dancing across Preston's chest and Jerome's terrified face. I typed a quick command into my terminal, overriding the front door, steel deadbolts specifically for the tactical team. The heavy oak doors were violently kicked open from the outside. Blinding white tactical flashlights flooded the grand foyer, erasing the darkness with a brilliant, harsh glare that made Preston cover his eyes and scream in pain. The beams of light sliced through the room, illuminating the sheer terror on my family members' faces. This was not a couple of bored local police officers responding to a neighborhood trespassing call. This was not a civil dispute unit arriving with a clipboard to look at forged rental agreements. A dozen heavily armed men clad in dark tactical gear poured into the foyer. They were wearing heavy body armor with the letters FBI emblazoned across their chests in bold yellow text, alongside officers from the Georgia State SWAT team. They moved with terrifying military precision, fanning out across the imported marble floor and aiming their tactical weapons directly at Preston and Jerome. A massive voice boomed through a heavy megaphone vibrating the very walls of the manor. "Federal agents, show your hands, get on the ground right now." The sheer volume and authority of the command left absolutely no room for negotiation. There was no chance to explain. There was no chance to pull out a fake lease agreement and talk about squatters' rights. The federal agents were not there to discuss local tenant law. They were there to execute a high-risk felony arrest warrant for interstate wire fraud, identity theft, and federal embezzlement. Preston dropped to his knees immediately, his arrogant facade entirely broken by the sheer force of the federal raid. His hands were shaking so violently that he could barely raise them above his head. Brenda let out a blood-curdling scream and threw herself flat against the marble floor, her expensive designer dress tearing against the hard stone. Jerome stood completely frozen for a fraction of a second, his eyes wide with absolute disbelief, before a SWAT officer grabbed him by the shoulder and forced him down onto the ground. The tactical team did not hesitate. While several agents secured the three adults in the foyer, a heavily armed squad immediately moved toward the grand curving staircase. They bounded up the steps, moving with ruthless efficiency toward the master suite, where Alicia was still screaming and pounding on the closet door. I watched the entire coordinated operation unfold on my monitors, feeling a deep, profound sense of satisfaction. My family had tried to use a broken local legal system to steal my home and ruin my life. Instead, they had walked blindly into a highly coordinated federal sting operation. The red lasers and the blinding flashlights bouncing off the walls of my estate were the absolute perfect consequences for their incredible greed. There was no going back from this moment. The trap had fully closed. The sheer volume of the federal raid is deafening as tactical boots swarm the grand foyer. Brenda is screaming in absolute terror, her voice cracking as heavily armed agents surround her on the imported marble floor. She is begging and pleading, crying out that she is a respectable pastor's wife and that there has been some kind of terrible mistake. Jerome is pressed flat against the cold stone, his cheek mashed into the floor, while a SWAT officer holds him firmly in place. The dignified church leader who just hours ago stood at a podium judging his congregation is reduced to a trembling mess, completely unable to process the military grade raid happening inside a house he thought he had successfully stolen. Upstairs, the tactical squad breaches the master suite. I watch through the camera feed as they drag Alicia out of my custom closet where she was hiding. She is shrieking hysterically as the agents guide her down the sweeping grand staircase, forcing her to join the rest of the family in the foyer. As she drops to the floor, the chaotic movement causes her maternity dress to shift violently. The foam padding she had been using to fake her 6-month pregnancy slips out from under her designer waistband and lands directly on the polished marble in front of everyone. The blinding tactical flashlights illuminate the pathetic foam prop. She is not a pregnant mother looking for a safe home to raise a child. She is just a desperate scam artist exposed in the harsh glare of reality. Amidst the pure chaos, Preston is desperately trying to salvage his shattered master plan. He is kneeling on the floor, sweating profusely, but his arrogant ego simply refuses to accept defeat. He truly believes he can still talk his way out of a federal sting operation using his cheap real estate broker tricks. Keeping his hands visible, he slowly reaches into his designer jacket pocket. The agents instantly raise their weapons, shouting commands for him to freeze, but Preston slowly pulls out a folded piece of paper. His hands are shaking so violently, the paper rattles in his grip as he holds it up toward the blinding lights. "Wait! Please, just wait!" Preston yells, trying to project his usual smooth-talking confidence, but failing miserably. "We are legal tenants here. I have the lease agreement right here in my hand. We paid 6 months of rent in advance. You cannot arrest us. This is a civil dispute. You have to call the local police department and let them handle this as an eviction matter. You have no jurisdiction to throw us out of our legally rented home." A tall man wearing a heavy tactical vest steps forward from the perimeter of the room. It is Special Agent Marcus Hayes. He walks over to where Preston is kneeling and snatches the folded paper right out of his trembling hands. Marcus does not even bother to unfold the document to look at the forged signatures. He just looks down at Preston and lets out a deep echoing laugh that completely destroys Preston's remaining confidence. "You think this piece of paper means anything special?" Agent Hayes says, his voice dripping with absolute contempt. "You transmitted forged real estate documents using interstate banking servers to steal a $4.5 million property. You wired stolen megachurch charity funds across state lines to cover your massive cryptocurrency debts. That is federal wire fraud, son. You are not a tenant, and this is not a local civil dispute. You are a federal criminal, and you are facing 20 years in a federal penitentiary." The color completely drains from Preston's face. The realization hits him like a physical blow to the chest. He is not dealing with local cops who do not want to fill out eviction paperwork. He is dealing with federal agents who have already mapped every single digital fingerprint he ever left behind. His grand squatter scheme has just handed him a mandatory minimum prison sentence. He opens his mouth to argue, but no words come out. His arrogant real estate broker persona completely shatters, leaving behind a pathetic, terrified man who knows his entire life is over. "Roll him over, Marcus," commands the SWAT officers. The sound of heavy metallic ratcheting echoes through the grand foyer as cold steel handcuffs are violently clamped around Preston's wrists. Click, click. The sound is sharp and final. The officers move down the line, executing the same maneuver on the rest of my family. Jerome lets out a low, pathetic sob as his wrists are bound behind his back. Brenda's cries turn into incoherent wails as the cold metal bites into her skin. Alicia lies perfectly still, staring blankly at her fake foam pregnancy belly, resting on the marble floor while the cuffs lock around her wrists. Click, 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 click. The rhythmic sound of the locking mechanisms plays like a beautiful symphony through the audio feed in my secure command bunker. I sit back in my ergonomic leather chair, watching the 4 of them lying face down on my imported marble floor, entirely neutralized. They had arrived at my gates feeling entitled and victorious, ready to steal my sanctuary and ruin my life out of pure greed and spite. They had treated me like an arrogant tech nerd who was too naive to protect herself. Now they are completely immobilized, facing decades behind bars, while I sip my black coffee in total comfort. The panic radiating from the screens is intoxicating. The trap has flawlessly executed exactly as designed, leaving them with absolutely no escape route and no more lies to hide behind. I watch Preston writhing weakly against his restraints, his face pressed against the cold stone floor. His entire real estate career, his freedom and his reputation are completely gone, evaporated in the span of 5 minutes. Brenda is still muttering prayers under her breath, begging for a divine intervention that will never come. Jerome is completely silent, crushed by the weight of his own hypocrisy. Alicia is weeping softly, mourning the loss of the designer clothes and the luxury lifestyle she thought she had successfully stolen from me. They are a pathetic portrait of greed and entitlement laid bare for the federal agents to witness. I take a deep breath, letting the sweet air of absolute victory fill my lungs. It is time to leave the bunker and make my final appearance to deliver the ultimate closure to this dark chapter of my life. I stood up from my ergonomic leather chair inside the secure command bunker. The glowing monitors illuminated my face one last time before I turned away from the digital battlefield. I grabbed my car keys and my encrypted tablet, making sure the live camera feeds were streaming perfectly to the portable device. The drive from my bunker to the Alpharetta Manor took exactly 14 minutes. It was 14 minutes of pure, uninterrupted silence to reflect on a lifetime of being treated like an outcast, an angry black woman, and a target for their endless greed. I pulled my dark luxury sedan through the wide-open wrought iron security gates. The flashing red and blue lights of the federal cruisers and the state SWAT vehicles cast a chaotic, rhythmic strobe effect across my perfectly manicured front lawn. The heavy oak doors of my estate were pinned wide open, held back by tactical officers who were actively securing the perimeter of the crime scene. I stepped out of my car and let the crisp night air hit my face. I smoothed the fabric of my emerald green suit, ensuring I looked exactly as powerful and untouchable as I felt. I walked up the wide stone steps, my high heels clicking against the concrete with rhythmic authority. The heavily armed tactical officers parted slightly to let me pass, recognizing me immediately as the rightful owner of the estate and the sole architect of this entire federal sting operation. I stepped through the doorway and crossed the threshold into the grand foyer of my own home. The blinding tactical flashlights had been supplemented by the ambient emergency lighting of my smart home system. Laying across my imported Italian marble floor were the 4 people who had spent my entire life trying to tear me down and steal my peace. Preston, Jerome, Brenda, and Alicia were all face down, their hands cuffed tightly behind their backs, with thick, heavy zip ties and metal cuffs. They looked like discarded trash dumped unceremoniously in the middle of a pristine museum. I walked slowly around their prone bodies, holding my tablet out so the screen faced downward toward them. The live camera feeds showed multiple angles of their pathetic, crushing defeat. The sharp clicking of my heels echoed off the vaulted ceilings, making them flinch with every single step I took. Brenda managed to twist her neck, straining painfully to look up at me from the cold, hard stone floor. Her expensive designer dress was torn at the shoulder and covered in pale wood dust from the locksmith's drilling. Valerie Brenda screamed, her voice hoarse and completely desperate. "Valerie, thank God you are here. Please tell them it is a misunderstanding. Tell these federal agents to take these handcuffs off us right now. We are your family, Valerie. We were just coming to secure the empty house for you while you were in London." I stopped pacing and stood directly in front of her, looking down at the woman who had stolen my college fund and physically assaulted me in a church lobby just 2 nights ago. I did not raise my voice. I did not show a single ounce of anger or sorrow. I spoke with the cold, clinical precision of a surgeon completing a successful operation. "You told me failures do not belong in a nice house, Mother," I said, my words dropping like heavy stones onto the marble floor. "You told me I was a bitter, lonely woman who owed this family everything. Well, look at you now. You are lying on the floor of my $4.5 million estate, wearing federal handcuffs because you thought you could outsmart me. You just lost your right to be in society, let alone my home." Alicia started sobbing loudly again, burying her face against the cold stone to avoid looking at my eyes. The fake foam pregnancy belly was still sitting on the floor a few feet away from her. I kicked it lightly with the toe of my expensive shoe, sending the pathetic prop sliding across the foyer. I turned my gaze to Preston, who was sweating profusely through his ruined designer suit. "You thought your real estate license made you untouchable, Preston," I said, my voice cutting through his silent panic. "You thought you could use the laws designed to protect vulnerable people to steal a mansion from a black woman who outsmarted you at every turn. You are going to federal prison, and you are going to lose everything you ever thought made you superior." Preston just whimpered, a pathetic sound escaping his throat. I looked at my father, Jerome, the disgraced pastor. "You stood at a pulpit and preached about greed while stealing from the homeless, Jerome," I told him softly. "You enabled all of this. You let them attack me because you were too weak to face your own financial failures. Your church congregation will see your mugshot on the morning news." Jerome was weeping silently, his pastoral dignity and his religious authority shattered beyond any hope of repair. Special Agent Marcus Hayes stepped forward, holding a heavy metal clipboard. "The property is fully secured, Valerie," he stated professionally, his voice echoing in the large room. "We have collected the forged lease documents, the drilling equipment, and all of the suspects' cell phones as evidence. My cyber division team is already extracting the text messages and emails they sent planning this breach. It is a flawless federal case." I looked back down at the four criminals groveling on my floor. "There is no misunderstanding here," I told Brenda, completely ignoring her continued desperate pleading. "You chose to protect a thief and a fraud. You chose to attack me and plot to steal my sanctuary using fake documents and cheap locksmiths. You thought I was weak because I walked away from your toxic behavior years ago. But walking away was just me building my strength and my wealth in peace. This right here is me using it to protect what is mine." Marcus gave a sharp nod to his tactical team. "Get them up and get them out of here," he ordered, his voice booming with authority. The SWAT officers moved in and hauled Preston, Jerome, Brenda, and Alicia up from the floor. They dragged them roughly toward the open front doors. Brenda was still screaming my name, begging for mercy, and crying out that blood is thicker than water. Alicia was stumbling, unable to walk in her expensive heels with her hands bound behind her back. Preston dragged his feet, looking completely hollowed out and destroyed. Jerome kept his head bowed in absolute crushing shame. I stood in the exact center of my grand foyer and watched with deep, profound satisfaction as they were marched out into the humid Georgia night. They were shoved into the back of the waiting federal cruisers. The heavy metal doors slammed shut behind them, locking them inside the cages they had built for themselves through their own boundless greed. The flashing red and blue lights illuminated their terrified faces through the wire mesh windows of the police vehicles. I did not feel a single shred of guilt or regret. I watched the cruisers pull away down my long, winding driveway, taking the last remnants of my toxic past away forever. My house was finally quiet again. My empire was completely secure. The air inside the manor felt clean and light. The nightmare they had tried to bring to my doorstep had been entirely neutralized. The fallout began before the sun even rose the next morning. The federal sting operation at my Alpharetta Manor was not a quiet affair, and the arrest of a prominent real estate broker alongside the head of finance for one of Atlanta's largest megachurches was prime news material. By 6 a.m., local news helicopters were circling the church, and reporters were camped outside Preston's boutique real estate office in Midtown. But the public spectacle was nothing compared to the absolute devastation of Preston's personal and professional life. Preston was born into an affluent white family in Buckhead, a family whose entire identity was built on country club memberships, generational wealth, and flawless public reputations. His parents had spent their lives carefully cultivating an image of Southern aristocratic perfection. When the news broke that their son had been arrested by the FBI for wire fraud, identity theft, and embezzling hundreds of thousands of dollars from a black megachurch, their reaction was swift and ruthless. They did not rush to the federal courthouse to post his bail. They did not hire a high-powered defense attorney to fight the charges. Instead, they issued a brief, coldly detached statement through their family lawyer, claiming they were shocked and appalled by Preston's actions, and immediately severed all financial and personal ties with him. Preston's father, a retired corporate executive, formally removed him from the family trust and publicly disowned him to protect the family name. Preston's country club membership was revoked by noon. His former friends and business associates deleted his number and scrubbed any mention of him from their social media profiles. The privilege and the powerful network he had always relied on to bail him out of his mistakes completely evaporated in the span of 12 hours. He was entirely on his own, facing the full crushing weight of the federal justice system. The Georgia Real Estate Commission did not wait for a conviction to take action. Presented with the undeniable digital evidence I had provided, showing Preston using his federal broker credentials to generate forged residential leases and manipulate interstate banking servers, the commission convened an emergency hearing. They permanently revoked his real estate license, stripping him of his career and his only legitimate source of income. His boutique office in Midtown was shuttered, the assets seized by creditors to cover his massive cryptocurrency debts. The arrogant broker who thought he could outsmart a financial forensics expert was now an unemployed, disgraced felon with absolutely no future in the industry. But the most devastating blow for Preston came during his initial bail hearing. He stood before a federal magistrate judge wearing a bright orange county-issued jumpsuit, his expensive tailored suit replaced by rough, scratchy fabric. His hands and ankles were shackled heavily, restricting his movements. The swagger and the smug confidence he had displayed in the restaurant and the church lobby were completely gone. He looked pale, exhausted, and visibly trembling. The federal prosecutor presented the evidence I had compiled, laying out the meticulous, premeditated nature of Preston's crimes. They detailed how he had scouted my property, hired an unlicensed locksmith, forged federal documents, and conspired to steal my $4.5 million estate to cover up his role in a massive church embezzlement scheme. The prosecutor argued that Preston's willingness to exploit his professional licenses and manipulate interstate banking systems demonstrated a sophisticated capacity for ongoing fraud, making him a severe flight risk and a danger to the community's financial security. The judge reviewed the digital forensics report tracing Preston's IP address and linking his broker portal login to the forged signature on the fake lease. The evidence was absolute and irrefutable. Because Preston had used federal networks to execute the wire fraud, and because the sheer amount of the embezzled church funds crossed the threshold for severe federal penalties, the judge denied bail completely. Preston was remanded to federal custody pending trial, facing a mandatory minimum sentence of 10 to 20 years in a federal penitentiary. I received the transcript of the hearing later that afternoon from Special Agent Marcus Hayes. Reading the details of Preston's complete breakdown in the courtroom brought a profound sense of closure. According to the court record, Preston had openly wept when the judge denied bail, begging for a chance to explain, claiming he had been desperate and that he never meant for things to escalate so far. He had tried to play the victim, blaming his cryptocurrency losses and his failing business, but the federal judge had shown no sympathy for a man who tried to steal a home and ruin a life simply to cover his own disastrous choices. Preston was currently sitting in a cold, sterile holding cell, completely stripped of his arrogance, his wealth, and his freedom. The luxury sports car my parents had bought him with my stolen college fund was already being repossessed by the bank. The designer clothes he loved to flaunt were packed away in an evidence locker. He had spent his entire life believing his privilege and his smooth-talking charm made him untouchable. He thought he could manipulate the legal system and bully those he considered beneath him without ever facing real consequences. He had never encountered a force like absolute digital truth. The forensic evidence I had gathered did not care about his family name or his confident smile. It only cared about the data, and the data had systematically dismantled his entire existence, proving that no amount of privilege could save him from the undeniable reality of his own crimes. While Preston sat rotting in a federal holding cell, the rest of my family experienced a collapse so absolute and devastating that it sent shockwaves through the entire Atlanta metropolitan area. Jerome was officially indicted by a federal grand jury for multiple counts of corporate embezzlement and wire fraud. The megachurch board of directors did not hesitate for a single second to protect their own interests. They publicly stripped him of his title as head of finance and completely excommunicated him from the congregation he had manipulated for years. The internal audit revealed the true extent of his theft, confirming exactly what my digital forensics had already proven. Because Jerome had used the family home and their shared bank accounts to funnel the stolen charity money, the federal government moved swiftly to seize all of his remaining assets. The sprawling suburban house that Brenda had decorated with stolen funds was foreclosed upon and seized to repay the outraged congregation. His luxury cars, his retirement accounts, and his pristine pastoral reputation were completely wiped out. Jerome was reduced to a broken, disgraced old man, facing the very real prospect of spending his remaining years in a minimum security prison. Brenda suffered a fate that was perhaps even worse than prison for a woman entirely obsessed with public perception. She became the ultimate social pariah of Atlanta. The viral mugshots from the night of the federal raid were leaked to the local press and splashed across every major news network and social media platform in the state. There was Brenda stripped of her expensive makeup and designer gowns, wearing a generic gray county jail uniform, with her hair an absolute mess. Her beloved country club immediately revoked her membership, sending a formal letter of expulsion that cited severe moral turpitude. The wealthy widows and prominent politicians she had spent decades brown-nosing actively avoided her, completely cutting her out of their social circles. She could not even walk into a local grocery store without being recognized as the corrupt pastor's wife who tried to steal her own daughter's house. The perfect family image she had ruthlessly maintained at my expense was permanently reduced to a pathetic digital punchline. But the most poetic justice was reserved for Alicia. The tactical squad arresting her in my grand foyer had inadvertently exposed her fake 6-month pregnancy to the entire world. The foam padding slipping out onto my imported marble floor was documented in the official federal arrest report. Local journalists and internet sleuths quickly connected the dots, linking her viral crying video in the rental car to the completely fabricated pregnancy she used to gain public sympathy. The internet backlash was swift and utterly merciless. The same local influencers who had previously called me a heartless corporate monster immediately turned their wrath onto Alicia, labeling her a sociopathic scam artist. She was permanently banned from every social media platform she used to flaunt her fake luxury lifestyle. With Preston denied bail and facing decades in federal prison, and our parents completely bankrupted by asset seizures, Alicia was left entirely alone with absolutely zero financial support. The designer clothes and expensive handbags she had hoarded were auctioned off to pay for her mounting legal fees. She was forced to move into a cheap, run-down motel on the outskirts of the city. The golden child who had never worked a hard day in her life was suddenly forced to take a minimum wage job folding clothes at a discount retail store just to afford cheap ramen noodles and bus fare. The crushing reality of actual poverty broke her completely. 6 months passed since the night the federal tactical lights illuminated my grand foyer. The changing seasons brought a profound sense of peace to my Alpharetta manor. The silence in my home was no longer heavy with the threat of invasion. It was a luxurious, comforting quiet that I had earned through absolute precision and unyielding boundaries. My cybersecurity and financial forensics firm was thriving beyond my wildest expectations. The highly publicized takedown of a federal wire fraud ring had essentially served as a massive global marketing campaign for my software algorithms. My company valuations skyrocketed, pulling in massive contracts from international banking institutions and government defense contractors. I was no longer just a successful tech CEO. I was an absolute titan in my industry. It was a warm Friday evening, and I was standing on the expansive master balcony of my estate, looking out over the manicured gardens and the private tree line. I was wearing a simple, elegant silk robe and holding a crystal glass of expensive vintage red wine. The setting sun cast a beautiful golden glow across the property, illuminating the perfect, peaceful sanctuary I had built entirely from scratch. Inside the manor, my private chef was preparing a massive gourmet dinner. I was hosting a private celebration for my loyal colleagues, my brilliant legal team, and the true friends who had supported my vision from the very beginning. There was laughter echoing from the main dining room, the sound of brilliant minds and genuine connections filling the space that my toxic relatives had once tried to claim. The calm evening air was interrupted by the sudden vibration of my personal encrypted cellular device resting on the outdoor patio table. I walked over and picked it up. The caller ID displayed an unknown automated number tracing back to the Fulton County Jail holding facility. I took a slow sip of my wine, letting the rich flavor settle on my tongue before I pressed the green button to accept the call. An automated robotic voice announced that I had a collect call from an inmate. I accepted the charges. The line clicked and connected. Valerie, a ragged, desperate voice, sobbed through the harsh static of the prison phone line. It was Brenda. She sounded incredibly old and completely broken. Valerie, please do not hang up on me. Please, I am begging you. The public defender they assigned to me is terrible. They are talking about offering a plea deal that includes real jail time for the accessory charges. You have to hire a private defense attorney for me. You have millions of dollars, Valerie. Please, you have to help your mother. Blood is thicker than water. We are family. I stood on my balcony feeling the cool evening breeze brush against my face. I looked down at the exact spot on the driveway where the heavy moving truck had parked 6 months ago. I listened to her pathetic weeping echoing through the phone receiver, remembering the sharp sting of her hand slapping my face in the church lobby. I remembered the decades of psychological abuse, the stolen college tuition, and the absolute lack of remorse she showed when she walked into my dark house to steal my hard-earned empire. I took another slow, deliberate sip of my wine. My voice was perfectly calm, cold, and entirely void of any emotion when I finally responded to her desperate pleas. "The only blood here is the blood you tried to drain from me, Mother," I said, the absolute finality of my words hanging in the air between us. "You made your choices. You chose your golden child and your fraudulent pastor husband. You chose to be a thief. You chose to be a criminal. And now you get to be a convict. The number you are calling no longer exists in your world." "Valerie, please!" Brenda screamed, her voice cracking with absolute terror. I pulled the phone away from my ear and pressed the red button, disconnecting the call instantly. I opened my security settings and permanently blocked the facility routing number, ensuring that neither Brenda, nor Jerome, nor Preston could ever reach my personal device again. The digital barrier was fully erected, sealing them away in the dark concrete cells they had built for themselves. I set my phone face down on the table and picked up my wine glass. I turned my back on the darkening horizon and walked through the open French doors back into the warm, glowing light of my master suite. I walked down the sweeping double staircase, the exact same stairs Alicia had tried to claim as her own. As I entered the grand dining room, my true friends and loyal colleagues raised their glasses to toast my arrival. I smiled a genuine, radiant smile and raised my crystal glass in return. The toxic weight of my biological family was completely gone, evaporated into the federal justice system. I had drawn an iron boundary around my life, and my empire was perfectly secure. The ultimate clean break was finally complete. The most profound lesson from this story is that blood does not automatically earn loyalty, respect, or access to your life. True security comes from building unyielding boundaries and refusing to shrink yourself to accommodate the toxic insecurities of others. When people repeatedly show you their greed and manipulate your success for their own selfish gain, the healthiest response is to walk away. You do not owe your hard-earned empire to those who only view you as a resource. True family is chosen built on mutual respect and genuine support rather than obligation, manipulation, and endless emotional abuse. Stand firm. If this story inspired you to finally protect your peace and cut ties with toxic relatives, please hit the like button and subscribe for more empowering content.